Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll hear a Christmas tune from the Dakota Air Musicians. But first, joining me now is the president of the North Dakota AARP, Janice Cheney. Janice, thanks so much for joining us today.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe where you're originally from.
Okay, well, I actually grew up in Massachusetts, which seems like a long way from North Dakota most days. However, I came to North Dakota to go to graduate school at NDSU in 1976, so I have spent a good 36 years, most of my life here. I married a guy from Mott, have given birth to two wonderful daughters who now actually live and work over here in the Fargo area, and consider North Dakota my home.
Yeah. Well, now, how did you come to be the president of AARP?
Actually, it's state director.
State director.
We have a volunteer state president. I am the state director for AARP, and I'm a staff person. I'm a paid employee of the organization. I worked in previous parts of my life for Governor Sinner in North Dakota, and became pretty involved at that time in human service and health-related matters, some of the things that I worked on in his office. Subsequently, after 92, when Governor Sinner left office, I worked for the state insurance department and created, from a federal grant, they had been awarded a counseling program to assist senior citizens with Medicare and other health insurance kinds of issues. Subsequently then, AARP in the late 90s, early 2000s came to the conclusion that they were going to open offices in every state. And so I applied to the organization and was fortunate enough to be hired as so far the first and so far the only state director that North Dakota's had as a staff person.
Okay. We'll talk more about maybe the history and then what is AARP of North Dakota.
Sure. AARP was founded in 1958, so we've fairly recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. It was founded by a woman named Ethel Percy Andrus, who was quite an amazing woman for her time. She founded the organization when she was about 73, having previously worked with and developed the National Retired Teachers Association, which still exists and is a subsidiary of AARP. Ethel Percy Andrus got a PhD in education back in the days when it was very uncommon for women to have that level of education. She was the first woman principal of a high school in California and absolutely turned that school around. One of the ways that she did that was by creating community, and we'll come back to that thought as we continue in our conversation. She retired from that work when her mother needed help. Her mother became ill and needed some assistance, so she had a significant role for part of her life as a caregiver. And subsequently, when her mother was doing better, her activism came about when she went to visit a former teacher and found this former teacher living in a converted chicken coop, because that was all she could afford, and clearly had difficulties with medication and with food and resources. And that really galvanized her, and she spent a good number of years then, and resulting in AARP, among other things, working on pension reform and retirement security and health insurance issues, all of which continue to be significant priorities for our association.
Well then, what is the organization's mission?
The basic mission of the organization is to assure that we all have what we need to live with dignity and purpose as we age. It's a pretty broad kind of statement, but I think it is increasingly important because heaven knows most of us are living, fortunately and hopefully healthfully, a great deal longer. So we want to be sure that people have the resources that they need to live in good health and good standing as long as they live, to be able to live where they wish to live, to be able to remain healthy mentally and physically, to remain active in their communities. Really, one of the reasons that the association began the process of putting offices in every state was to be able to be closer to members and to find ways to bring members more into the kind of, not only the kind of activism that Ethel Percy Andrus was involved with, but also into a community level of activism that really helps to benefit family members, friends, and others in the community.
Okay. Well, how many members do you have in North Dakota, and then I guess nationally? So
in North Dakota, we currently have about 87,000 members. And nationally, I believe that figure is about 36 million at this point in time.
And what kind of services do you offer? I guess mainly we considered here in North Dakota.
Sure, and it's the association is actually made up of three parts. There's the foundation, which is a 501c3 organization, in which currently has a priority of hunger, which I may be able to talk about a little bit more later. 501c4, which is the part that I work for, which deals with education and information and advocacy on issues. And then a for-profit side, which provides some of the member benefits like discounts at hotels and car rental things, and options for vacations and insurance products. So the three are pretty separate, legally and in the process of their business operations. But it is that for-profit side that funds our social mission and our work to try to make sure people live with dignity and purpose.
Yeah. Well, Janice, I know as we're taping this, the election has not taken place yet, so we'll qualify that. But many issues have come up during the election, and with Medicare, Social Security, other things like that. Do you sometimes kind of bristle up a little bit when you hear one of the candidates sort of mentioning AARP and sort of trying to get you on their side? Or?
Well, there have been several instances in this round of things, this cycle, where organizations other than AARP have used our name, and indeed our colleagues at our national office in Washington are very, very vigilant to watch that and to try to set the record straight. We do not endorse candidates. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. But we are political. It's hard to be involved in a way that is going to benefit a lot of people without being somewhat political, especially in this environment. And so we do take positions on issues very strongly. One of our, and clearly tying back to my comments earlier about our founder, in terms of financial security and retirement security and health care, those are all issues that are still very much a concern, particularly for our older members, but we feel it's very necessary to get people thinking about those things early in life so that they have planned for their retirement. The other perspective on that is indeed, I've lost my train, I'm sorry. Just catch it again and go on.
Let's just work through it here.
Okay.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, the one of the clear and just most important things to us is that people are informed as voters, and that they are able to take facts with them when they make decisions about candidates and about elections and about issues. And we certainly in this cycle also have seen situations where people are saying things that are at best inaccurate and at worst totally untrue about things like Medicare and Social Security.
Well, with that, then I understand you recently had a program where citizens were invited to come to forums. I believe you called it You've Earned a Say. Can you tell us about that and what those forums were all about? That
was our primary activity and initiative this past year, and the bottom line, basic premise of that effort was to get the discussion out from Washington, out from behind closed doors in Washington, and into communities and into the minds and hearts, if you will, of people who are going to be affected by those programs, either currently or in the future. The work is still ongoing and will continue obviously into the next Congress and under the next president, whoever that has turned out to be by the time this is aired. The thing that we, I think, need to come back to and remember is why both of those programs were started. And Social Security began, as some may know or remember, in the mid-1930s, was passed under President Franklin Roosevelt. And it was designed to provide a floor of income for people in their retirement years. It was not ever intended to be all of a person's retirement income or resources, but it was certainly intended to provide a floor below which they would not fall. Medicare, likewise, was begun in the 1960s. Interestingly, and something that maybe people don't know, is that prior to that time, most people 60, 65 and over retired people did not have access to health insurance. Insurance companies wouldn't sell it to them. And that was one of the things that Ethel Percy Andrus made a priority in her early work, was to, she went to many, many, many insurance companies and said, I've got this block of people who need insurance. Won't you sell it to us? And she finally found someone who would be was willing to do that. And indeed, that was pre-Medicare, but the Medicare program grew out of that as a government service, and remains a hugely important piece of people's retirement security, is the health care they get through Medicare.
Okay. Well, let's start walking through some of the different things here. I mean, you talked about, you don't endorse candidates, but you do take positions on various issues. What about the Affordable Care Act? I mean, obviously this was talked about a lot. And can you tell us about what kind of position you had on that?
AARP supported the Affordable Care Act, as we did, which was obviously proposed by a Democratic president. We also supported, I might just hark back to a number of years ago, we supported the Medicare Prescription Drug Act, which was proposed and ultimately passed under a Republican president. The Affordable Care Act, healthcare is just an absolute necessity for people, and the ability to afford healthcare and to find reasonable healthcare is just something that needs to be thought of as a fundamental human right, I believe. The Affordable Care Act did a number of things which benefit not only our members but the wider population. It provides a number of preventive services to help keep people healthier, and over a period of time, that sort of thing will start to make a difference in costs. It won't happen right away. Things that are good rarely happen immediately. Covers far more people, takes away pre-existing conditions. I mean, if I were to lose my job for some reason, being a cancer survivor, there isn't probably an insurance company that would want to take me on without absent something like this that requires that they do that. Kids being able to be on their parents' insurance until age 26 is huge for many of our members, grandparents as well as parents. And the removal of lifetime caps on insurance payments is another huge piece of that. Again, I think one of our challenges in looking at this previously and going forward is making sure people have the facts. There's so much misinformation out there that it kind of boggles the mind. One of the important benefits, in addition to preventive services that are available to people on Medicare, is the infamous donut hole that was part of the prescription drug legislation that was passed back in 2003, I believe. And the Affordable Care Act, the healthcare reform law, actually over a period of time closes that donut hole.
Well, could you explain
What
that
is the
donut
donut
hole? Because a
hole?
lot of people out there, have heard about it, but may not really. Yeah.
Sure. The prescription drug plan was an expensive proposition, and in order to put it into practice, one of the ways they did that was that they created kind of a hole in the benefit in the middle of it. So when people purchase a prescription drug plan, they have coverage up to a certain point, and then the coverage basically goes away until they reach another point of having spent a certain amount of money. And at that upper end, and I'm not using numbers, first of all, because I don't have them in my head, and secondly, because they change somewhat each year, but after they reach a certain upper point of payment out of pocket, then they get very, very good coverage. The Affordable Care Act, over a period of the years 2013 to 2020, essentially closes and eliminates that donut hole so that people won't have that gap in coverage anymore.
Okay. Janice, do you sometimes find that people don't actually understand that Medicare is actually a government-run health care?
It is, absolutely. And it's one of the most efficient government programs that there is, which is not to say that there aren't issues of fraud and waste and abuse, and the federal government, another thing that the Affordable Care Act did is provide the federal government with resources to go after some of that fraud and waste and abuse. There's always going to be somebody out there that's a half a step or a whole step ahead of the people that are trying to control that sort of situation. But the resources to find that, the resources to identify it, the resources to go after and charge and prosecute the people who are doing it are substantial, and they need to be if enacted effectively.
Yeah. Does AARP have a stance on proposals to increase the age at which people are eligible for Medicare?
You know, going back to our You've Earned a Say project and the conversations that we had with people, we AARP developed 2 booklets, one on Social Security, one on Medicare, that summarize some of the primary proposals for changing Social Security and Medicare that have been discussed by congressional people and other think tanks and so forth. We then provide a summary of the issue itself, and then we looked to someone from the Heritage Foundation, which is a fairly conservative sort of think tank, and someone from the Brookings Institute, and actually used a couple of other resources as well to comment on those possible solutions. So that, and put that all together in booklet form. There's 12 options for Social Security that are discussed in some detail, 15 for Medicare. We've provided that to the various groups and organizations that we've had discussions with over the last several months. Again, looking at people having facts to deal with. I mean, we came across people who, for example, believe that Congress doesn't pay into Social Security, and that's not true. Congress does pay into Social Security. So we looked at providing a baseline of factual information for people to work from, asked people to look at these various options and to give us their opinions. What this effort has been about primarily is listening to people, listening to our members, trying to hear and understand the importance of these programs to them and the way they would like to see them changed so that they are secure for not only current folks, but for our children and grandchildren as well.
Well, that leads me into sort of the next one. We've talked a lot about Medicare. You're mentioning Social Security. What about Social Security and protecting that program for future generations? Where does AARP stand on the Social Security in various ways to address the issue of keeping it solvent?
We, at this point in time, we've not taken a position on a specific way to solve the problems of Social Security and Medicare. Social Security is a far easier fix than Medicare. Social Security will be solvent. Your children and my children and our grandchildren will get Social Security. The way the program is set up, those who are working, and yes, there are fewer of us now than there were years ago, those who are working pay into Social Security. Those who are retired take out from Social Security. The program will remain solvent, and there will be money to pay 100% of benefits from Social Security until, I believe the current year is 2033. From 2033, for the next 75 years, there's enough money currently in the system to pay 75% of benefits. After that, I don't know, but we've got lots of time to fix it, is I guess the bottom line. And the fixes there are a variety of fixes. Probably no one thing is going to do it, but if people will come together, have some rational conversation, it can be done. And that I would mention as well as one of the things that came out in our conversations with people is their intense frustration with the gridlock that Congress that is being experienced in Washington right now. And to that is we would have conversations about that, and it's one of the things that I feel so very strongly about, and indeed ties back to a comment that our founder made a number of years back. She said that, I'm paraphrasing, but the future is ours, not just that it's going to happen to us, but that it is in part made by us. And so I say, if we are electing people to represent us, and if they are not doing what we think they should, we should talk to them about it, first of all, I suppose, give them a chance. And then if they still don't come across with what we think needs to happen, we should elect somebody else. So, you know, we really encourage people to be in contact with their elected officials, their congressional representatives, their state representatives, to make clear their expectation, in this particular instance, of cooperation to get something done that's constructive, and subsequently to ask them for not just be content with, oh, well, yes, of course I'll cooperate, but to say specifically, how are you going to do that? And then the next time you come to town and visit with me, tell me what you did.
Okay. Well, we spent a lot of time here talking about Medicare and Social Security, sort of national perspectives of things and issues, but let's bring it maybe down to the state level. And I realize, you know, we've got a new upcoming session about to start in North Dakota. Do you have any plans or any issues that you're going to be addressing come January? Absolutely.
AARP has had, even before there was a state office, through the terrific efforts of volunteers from across our state, we've had a significant presence at the North Dakota legislature. And this year will be no exception. Among the things that we know ahead of time we're going to be working on, things always come up that you need to track as well, but are issues related to guardianship and adult protective services, issues related to home and community-based services, pension reform, and some issues related to Medicaid expansion, and that ties back again to the Affordable Care Act, are things that we're going to be working on. We have developed a system and actually had about 20 people in Bismarck earlier this week that we talked to about being legislative buddies. And so those are folks from across the state who are going to be working with us, going to be keeping up with our issues and helping us connect with legislators, because we have obviously staff in Bismarck, but one or two people can't do it. And it's as important for legislators to be connected in their community with people who have concerns about these issues as it is for them to be connected with staff and lobbyists.
So yeah, again, I've heard you say today you try to educate and bring things to people's attention and at least get feedback and do that. Then tell me, because we only have about a minute or so left, because a lot of people think that the biggest benefit they get is a discount on maybe a night's stay in a hotel for being AARP, but really you are doing much more than that.
We really are, and in one of our priority issues and areas over the next year or two is also going to be developing a more significant presence in communities. One of the ways that we're currently doing that is working on hunger issues in particularly Burleigh and Cass counties, and that's in conjunction with a foundation program. But that advocacy piece, that education, that information, we're very interested in working with anyone who would like to be involved.
Okay, and you say that, how can people become members of AARP?
I go to aarp.org, and there'll be opportunities to join online. There will be ways to get involved online, and that comes back to us as well if it's people from North Dakota who want to be engaged. And they can always call us in Bismarck as well. Well,
that's the way to become a member, but I guess if they want more information or want to find out more about things, is the website still the best place to go?
It really is. I mean, there's an AARP/ND website, but the aarp.org website, if you work at it a little bit, will get you to North Dakota as well.
Well, Janice, thanks so much for joining us today, and good luck to you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Stay tuned for more. Dakota Air, the radio show, is a live radio production that travels across the Prairie region to provide audiences with a unique and entertaining experience. Local talent, culture, and history are incorporated into each stage show. Here is one of Dakota Air's favorite Christmas songs.
If it weren't for kids, have you ever thought there wouldn't be a Santa Claus? Look what the stork just brought, thank God for kids. We don't live in a quiet house without Big Bird or Mickey Mouse. There's Kool-Aid on the couch, thank God for kids. Thank God for kids, there's magic for a while. A special kind of sunshine when they smile. Did you ever stop to think or wonder why the nearest thing to heaven is a child? Daddy, how does this thing fly? 100 other wheres and whys. You really don't know, but you try. Thank God for kids. You look down on those trusting eyes that look at you and you realize there's a love you just can't buy. Thank God for kids. Thank God for kids, there's magic for a while. a special kind of sunshine in a smile. Did you ever stop to think or wonder why the nearest thing to heaven is a child? When you get down on your knees tonight, you thank the Lord for His guiding light and pray they turn out right. Thank God for kids. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funded in part by the North Dakota Council on the Arts and by the members of Prairie Public.